Hi, 7th and 8th grade. This is it, the last class of the year for literature. I am really excited about it because I like that sense of accomplishment. I like finishing things up, and we are going to finish this today. So get your books out. We are going to be looking at our very first poem for the day called Richard Cory. So open your book to the page that has Richard Cory on it. Get it on there. There we go. It has his picture, it has the poem. We're going to read it through once and then we're going to take it apart and then read it a third time like we usually do. Learning how to take apart a poem and understand it and then reread it with all of the knowledge that we've gained from it. That's what we're looking for here. That's the important thing. Okay, and let's see what's going on here. All right, so let's go through Richard Cory by Edwin Arlington Robinson. It says, whenever Richard Cory went downtown, we people on the pavement looked at him. He was a gentleman from sole to crown, clean-favored and imperially slim. And he was always quietly arrayed, and he was always human when he talked. But still he fluttered pulses when he said good morning, and he glittered when he walked. And he was rich, yes, richer than a king, and admirably schooled in every grace. In fine, we thought he was everything to make us wish we were in his place. So on we worked and waited for the light and went without the meat and cursed the bread. And Richard Cory, one calm summer night, went home and put a bullet through his head. The end of the poem comes as quite a surprise. There's a reason for that, because this poem is about a suicide. And when we think about a suicide, there's always an element of shock. Why in the world would a person do such a thing, even if they've had a history of mental illness, even if they've had a history of depression? It's still a shock that they would take that dramatic step. But let's take a look really at why the poem is the way it is. Remember, we're talking about imagery, the thing that makes you read the poem and yet use all five of your senses. When we discuss Richard Cory, we're going to actually see a lot of that. Okay, so let's take it apart little bit by little bit. It says, whenever Richard Cory went downtown, the idea that he's going downtown, that's where people are working. He is going downtown, so it means he doesn't live there. He's either living uptown in a high rise or a very nice house, or in the suburbs on an estate. We look at the name Richard Cory and remember that in poetry, every word, the diction, has a specific meaning. There's a reason why these words were chosen. Richard gives us the idea that the man is rich. Oh, it's also the name of several kings. So it's a kingly name. It means king, but it sounds like rich. Cory, when we first read it, we're not thinking of, well, that could have a different name. But now that we've read it all the way through and we realize that the person who is the main character in this poem is dead at the end, we can look at Cory and think corpse. So we're looking at a rich corpse or a kingly corpse. So he goes downtown. He doesn't live there, but this is where work takes place. Then the narrator or the speaker says, we people. So he doesn't see himself as in the same class or in the same background as Richard Cory. He sees himself as very, very separate. He says, we people on the pavement looked at him, which gives you an idea that maybe Richard Cory is not on the pavement. Maybe he is, but it's almost like he's a cut above. Maybe he's driving by in a car. Maybe his pavement seems a little more elevated, even if it's not. Maybe even if he's sharing the same pavement, he seems to be separate from the crowd, just from the way he handles himself. We on the pavement looked at him. He was a gentleman from sole to crown. Again, we get this picture of a king. The idea of sole, that's the bottom of the shoe, up to the crown, that's the top of the head. The top of the head is known as the crown, but when we look at Richard Cory being presented as a rich king, we can kind of imagine that the crown of the head is also an actual crown. It's actually a metaphorical crown. Okay? Clean favored, crown meaning, what a king wears. Clean favored, that means he looks clean. He has bathed, he's showered or whatever. The people who are on the pavement with him may not have really good access to running water, especially at the time that this was written. So he's clean-favored and imperially slim. He is thin, but it's because of fitness, not because of starvation. Okay? And he is, again, imperially slim, meaning that idea of kingship. And he was always quietly arrayed. I mean, he's dressed nicely, but he's not dressed in a flashy manner. He's old money. That's the picture we're getting from him. He knows how to dress. He dresses well. He dresses impeccably. Impeccably meaning without error. But he is quiet in his clothing. It's good clothing, but it's not flashy. And he was always human when he talked. When he talked to people, he was on their level. He didn't talk down to them. He talked to them face to face. He was always human when he talked. But still, even though he's dressed quietly, even though he looks clean and neat, even though he's not flashy, when he talks to people, people get nervous. That's what that means. But still, he fluttered pulses when he said good morning. So he just has to say good morning and people are like, oh, he talked to me. What am I going to do? Okay. The idea there is that he is a cut above. He is above everybody, even though he doesn't present himself that way. That's the way everybody sees him. And so when he talks to them, they don't talk to him like they're human beings talking to another human being. They talk to him like, oh, I don't want to say anything that's going to mess us up. Okay, so he flutters pulses. He makes people nervous. When he said good morning, and he glittered when he walked. Now, he's quietly arrayed, but there are still going to be some flashes of glitter. Okay, not the glitter you use and paste and get it all over the house. No. We're talking about little pieces of jewelry, things that would glitter. Maybe his buttons were nice, brass buttons, but more likely it's the cufflinks, the tie clip, the ring on his finger, maybe a watch or a pocket watch. So he glitters when he walks. And he was rich. Thank you, poet, but we know this, okay? We know this because you've already told it to us, and we are intelligent human beings who can take apart a poem and figure out what it means. So this man is rich. Yes, richer than a king. There's that king metaphor again. Okay, so when it repeats like that, when you have a repeated metaphor, we call that a motif, remember? So he is rich. He's richer than a king. And admirably schooled in every grace. He knows how to move. He knows why to move. He is gracious. He's schooled. He's understood. He understands because he was trained to understand. In fine, in this case, in fine means in conclusion, okay, meaning at the end. We thought that he was everything to make us wish we were in his place. So the narrator or speaker who is telling us this poem is saying, this guy was so impressive that we all looked at him and said, wow, we wish we were Richard Cory. We wish that we were in his place. But then the poem continues with, so on we worked. I don't know why okay. So on we worked. So the narrator speaker is saying, but you know what? We wish we could be him, but we've got jobs to do. We've got to work. We've got to work. We wait for the light. Why are they waiting for the light? Because they don't have electricity. We're talking about people who are on the poorer side. So they're waiting for the light. So they're waiting for the sun to come up to start their day. We went without the meat. It wasn't a choice. It wasn't like, people being a vegetarian. I'm a vegetarian. I go without the meat because I choose to. But this man who is the speaker is saying, look, we're poor. We don't have access to meat. It's very rare that we actually get some meat. And if we do, we're using it as in sauces, we're using it as a side, as a condiment. We go without the meat and we cursed the bread. The bread being cursed there is the idea that they're eating bread that today people pay a lot of money for, but back in the time this was written, brown bread, especially bread that had bits of seeds and wheat in it, whole pieces of seed and wheat, was considered the bread of the extremely poor. The extremely wealthy got bread that was made from wheat that was heavily processed to the point where it was nearly white. So they ate white bread if they were rich. They ate brown bread or even black bread if they were poor. So it's kind of changed since then. Now it seems like almost everybody eats wheat bread, but some people still eat white bread. They prefer the taste, but it generally is switched over to the poorer people eating white bread. So the speaker is saying, we work, we wait for the light, we go without the meat, we curse the bread. And then he brings us back to Richard Cory. And Richard Cory, one calm summer night, summer in poetry, remember when we talk about times of the year and a person in the same poem, we're talking about the age of the person usually. We're one calm summer night. So Richard Cory is in the youth of his life. He's probably in his upper youth, not quite to middle age, but he's an adult. He's a young adult. So he has all his life still ahead of him. So Richard Cory, one calm summer night, went home and put a bullet through his head. It's an extremely violent suicide. There's no suicide that really isn't violent because you're talking about wresting someone's soul away from their body. That's not a pleasant thought in any case, but the extreme punch of the end of this poem, that this man who is seen as so somebody you would want to be, someone who's a great example, someone that you would be jealous of, looking at his life and saying, it's not worth me being here. I don't even know why I exist. I shouldn't exist. I feel horrible because I exist. Therefore, I'm going to take myself out of existence. For the speaker, this is not even understandable. How does this even happen? This man that we all wished we could be sees himself as something that should not even be in existence. That's the hard thing about suicidal tendencies is people who are suicidal tend to keep that very, very quiet until they're past the point of that part of their depression. When they come out of it, they're usually pretty open about, yeah, there have been times I wanted to kill myself. For Richard Cory, we get no clue that this is what he was thinking, and that's very normal for those kinds of people. But let's talk about what happens after. When Richard Cory, one calm summer night, went home and put a bullet through his head, that is the end of Richard Cory. But that's not the end of the people around him. The speaker and everybody who is like the speaker, who just knows Richard Cory by sight and by reputation, are going to be thinking to themselves, what would make him want to take himself out of existence? What would make him want to kill himself? There is no evidence as to why he would want to do this. You can't get inside his brain anymore and find out why. You can't talk it through to find out why he feels this way. It's too late. But then think about Richard Cory's family. When he decided he no longer needed to be on this plane of existence, that he should die, he left behind people who loved him, people who cared about him. Even if he was without family, he would have had friends. He would have had somebody who cared about him. But when he decided to leave, when he decided to commit suicide, he was acting on a very selfish impulse that he was miserable, that he didn't belong in this plane of existence, that maybe he was causing more trouble than what he was worth, so he would just take himself out, not thinking that his suicide would actually cause a lot of pain to all those who are left behind, even to the man on the street who admired him. Okay. Now let's talk about these notes that I wrote in the book. When describing Richard Cory, Edward Arlington Robinson uses words to bring images into the reader's mind. We're talking about imagery here. In the poem, very little is mentioned about Richard Cory other than his outward appearance. Did you notice that? The man on the street, the speaker, doesn't really know Richard Cory. He only knows him by his reputation, that he's rich, richer than a king, and he only knows him by what he sees, the outward part of Richard Cory. But we get some clues from that outward part, don't we? He glitters when he walks. He's imperially slim. We know he's not missing any meals. He is friendly. He says good morning. He causes the fluttering of pulses. But let's take a look at this. It says, in the poem, very little is mentioned about Richard Cory other than his outward appearance as seen from a man on a street observer, who happens to be our speaker. Because Richard Cory and the speaker are from two different classes, one is very upper class, one is very lower class, they have very little contact. However, Richard Cory is a minor celebrity in his town, so the people know more about him than he knows about them. But even so, they know very little. What they do know is that he seems to have everything. He seems to have everything. So let's look at the words that paint this picture. We've got Richard, which is rich or kingly. Cory is reminiscent of corpse. The crown is the top of the head as well as a hat worn by royalty. Imperially means like a king or an emperor. Quietly arrayed means modestly fashionable, which is what modesty means in the Bible too. It means fashionable. Human is common like everyone else. Fluttered pulses caused excitement. Glittered refers to shiny gold, silver, platinum accessories. And schooled in every grace acted like a duke or a prince who are called by the title Your Grace. Okay, so we have these words that continue on. We've got waited for the night. You've got people. I have waited for the light. Okay. I must have made a misprint in my poem. But anyway, waited for the light or the night. I'll use either one. Looking forward to the beginning of the day because you don't have electric in your house, or the end of the day because it's the end of the workday. You go without meat. You can't afford meat protein. Beans were often substituted during this period of time, and they have become a staple in basically cultures throughout the world. Beans, because they're high in protein. Okay, and they fill you up. They curse the bread. They're forced to eat a coarser, low-quality product. Calm summer night. It's not only time of day, but also the era of a person's life. And someone who is in the summer of their life is in their prime as an adult. Okay, so the shock of the character's suicide is meant to duplicate the suddenness of such a death, a suicide. Finding out that someone commits suicide, people are shocked. It just seems so sudden. What tipped them off? What made them do it? The truth is, there is a thing that's called sudden suicide, where people who have suicidal tendencies anyway have a tendency to just one day, that becomes their norm. It's really sad. It really helps for people who have suicidal tendencies or have depression to talk to someone so they never get to that point where they just go, oh, you know what? Today's the day, and just do it almost as an impulse. So I'm telling you this because you are hitting puberty, which is a time when you have a lot of different hormones coursing through your body, because the pituitary gland is working overtime right now. And there are going to be times for some of you when you are going to feel very sad. And that's okay. It's okay to feel sad. Sometimes you'll be really happy and really sad all in the same day. That's perfectly normal. You are going through a hormonal roller coaster. So it's really important that you have conversations with adults that you trust. Talk to your parents. Talk to an aunt or uncle. Talk to a youth leader or a teacher. If you are to the point where you have ever had a suicidal thought, it's a good idea to talk not only to your parents, but when you go in for a checkup, talk to your family doctor, that sometimes you may get a little depressed. You don't necessarily need medication for that. Sometimes you do, and if you're told you probably should be on meds, then just go with it, okay? But even if you're on medication for depression or anxiety, you still need to talk to people. Medication alone is not going to help you. You need to have that flowing conversation, saying, you know what, today I feel really, really sad. Okay, well, let's take that apart. What is it that makes you feel sad? You don't know? Okay, well then let's do something to bring you out of the sadness. Okay. And I will give you a little tip on this. The number one way to get yourself out of sadness is to do something for someone else. So pray about somebody else. Think about what they might need and do something for someone else. Do the opposite of the selfish thing where you're constantly dwelling on yourself and what's causing you problems, and think about how you can help someone else. Okay. But in the meantime, you do need to keep those doors of communications, windows of communication open. It's not easy because when you're in puberty and your hormones are going crazy, you tend to be very flash in the pan, angry, raging, and then you get in trouble for that. And then you don't want to talk to parents because you feel like they've been unfair when you've been acting like a crazy person. Okay? Come on, let's face it. You know it's true. I'm acting like a crazy person. I got in trouble for yelling, and now I'm in my room and I've got all my electronics taken away from me. Ugh, now I hate my parents. Okay. It's time to put some of that rage aside and say, Mom, Dad, I have no idea what happened there. I was wrong for raging. So I would like to just talk to you guys about why I'm angry. You can have a conversation with your parents where it's calm and reasonable. Generally, parents are willing to listen to calm and reasonable arguments. Okay? So do that. Calm and reasonable. They would much rather have a conversation with you than find out that you've been hiding depression for a long time. Okay? Okay. So the fact that the no questions about his passing are answered in the poem mimic the idea there are no satisfactory answers as to why a person would decide to take his or her life. There is no good reason to take your life. There just isn't. People have tried to come up with good reasons to take a person's life or to take their own life. But the truth is, the people who are left behind are always left wondering why. What did I do wrong? And the truth is, it might not have been their fault at all, but they are taking that guilt on themselves. Okay, so I put this poem in here. It's a rough poem. It's tough. It's hard to listen to, hard to think about. But you know what suicide is? It's hard to listen to. It's hard to think about. But you've got to keep those lines of communication open because you may not be suicidal. You may not be thinking about killing yourself. I hope you're not. But there may be some times when you just need to sit down and talk with somebody. And that's a good thing. You need to do that. And you can arrange that in a way that's not where you sound like a crazy person. You don't run up to your mom and say, "You never listen to me." That is not opening the doors of communication. That's doing the exact opposite. Because your mom is probably thinking to herself, well, you never listened to me either. How many times have I told you to clean your room? Pick up your socks. Get off the video game. You need to approach your parents or your caregiver, the person, the adult you trust the most, in a kind and very gentle way and say, look, I just need someone to talk to. Can we talk? And I guarantee you they're going to say, absolutely. Let's sit down. Let's have a conversation. Okay? And that's really the reason I bring this poem up, because I think everybody needs someone to talk to. I think Richard Cory needed someone to talk to. Okay, now that we know everything about Richard Cory, and we've taken it apart, we've dug deep into his psyche, let's read the poem one more time, shall we? Richard Cory by Edwin Arlington Robinson. Whenever Richard Cory went downtown, we people on the pavement looked at him. He was a gentleman from sole to crown, clean-favored and imperially slim, and he was always quietly arrayed, and he was always human when he talked. But still he fluttered pulses when he said, "Good morning," and he glittered when he walked. And he was rich, yes, richer than a king, and admirably schooled in every grace. In fine, we thought he was everything to make us wish that we were in his place. So on we worked and waited for the light, and went without the meat and cursed the bread. And Richard Cory, one calm summer night, went home and put a bullet through his head. Okay, you have homework to do for Richard Cory. So I suggest you do it today as soon as our time is up so that you can get it while you still remember what we talked about, get it all done. But we are moving on to our next poem, which is Sonnet 130 by William Shakespeare. Yep, we're going to end our day, our class time together for the year with William Shakespeare, who is considered one of the greatest English authors of all time. Okay, now during his time, there was also a quarantine for the Black Plague. And during that time, he had to stop acting. That's what he was doing at the time the Black Plague broke out again, because it broke out constantly. And he had to leave London, so he could no longer be an actor in London. So instead, he was hired by a noblewoman to write sonnets to encourage her son to, grow up a little bit and get married. Find a nice girl, get married, make grandbabies. That's what she wanted. So he started the sonnets basically as an advertisement for the benefits of, getting married and having children. as the sonnet cycle went on, when sonnets are all really about one thing, one story, as the sonnet cycle went on, it kind of evolved to the young man who's being approached and talked to. He's being talked to by a poet, okay, a character that William Shakespeare created. It's not William Shakespeare. Remember, we're intelligent human beings. We realize that in poetry, the speaker is not usually the poet. Okay, for some reason, people forget that when it comes to the sonnets. So we have a poet trying to convince a young man to get married and have children. The young man meets a young lady, and she is called the Dark Lady because she is very different from all the other women that would be considered beautiful in England during this time. So she has really, really dark hair and beautiful dark eyes. And she is not at all blonde or light-skinned or anything like that. But yet she is so beautiful. And that's really important because beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and actually beauty is everywhere. So the Dark Lady comes about, and so we have the young man, the young nobleman, who starts to fall in love with the Dark Lady, but then it turns out the poet starts feeling affection for her as well. The poet being the character made by William Shakespeare. And then later on, there's going to be a rival poet that's going to come in, and he is going to, be attracted to the Dark Lady as well. So there's going to be a four-way love quadrangle, okay? But this poem here, you could either see it spoken by the poet, the character made up by William Shakespeare, not William Shakespeare himself, because again, the speaker is not usually the poet, the original writer. Or you could even say it was by the young man, but it's probably more likely this was the poet speaking here. But as we read this, keep in mind that she is not what's considered the atypical beauty of, she's not considered the typical beauty of the day. She's atypical. She is the exact opposite of what beauty is. Now that I've said that, let me also explain to you what a sonnet really is. Sonnets were invented in Italy, in Florence, during the Renaissance. And the way they were written was they would basically, they were there to pick up women. That was the whole purpose of sonnets, to woo women, to quote Mr. Keating from Dead Poets Society, the whole reason for poetry to exist. So in this sonnet, Shakespeare is going to actually be making a parody of an Italian sonnet. In the Italian sonnets, they would start with a woman's hair or eyes or nose or mouth. Okay, they would basically start at the top of the woman and work their way down, saying how incredibly beautiful she was. Oh, she has hair like a fluffy cloud. Oh, she has eyes like the bluest sky. Oh, she has teeth like pearls and lips as red as rubies, and her neck is like a tower. No, that's Song of Solomon. But you get the impression here. We go from head all the way down and describe the beautiful woman. They also had a rhyme scheme that was a little different because it was in Italian. But during Shakespeare's time, the sonnet was starting to be used quite a lot in England, but he fixed the rhyme scheme pretty much so it's every other word has, or every other syllable has an accent. There are generally, I think 12, and I gotta look for, okay, there's 12 lines and then 2 extra lines, so 14 lines total. So 12 lines where it's like every other line rhymes, and then the last 2 lines rhyme. Okay, so that became known as the English sonnet. This is going to be a parody of Italian sonnets, but it's still going to be beautiful. You can have a parody that's pretty. Okay, so let's talk about that. We're going to go a little over our time today. I'm just warning you now, and I'm turning off my timer because we're going to finish today. We're going to finish the book. So this is Sonnet 130 by William Shakespeare. My mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun. Coral is far more red than her lips red. If snow be white, why then her breasts are dun. If hairs be wires, black wires grow on her head. I have seen roses damasked, red and white, but no such roses see I in her cheeks. In incense perfumes there is more delight than in the breath that from my mistress reeks. I love to hear her speak, yet well I know that music hath a far more pleasing sound. I grant I never saw a goddess go. My mistress, when she walks, treads on the ground. And yet by heaven, I think my love as rare as any she belied with false compare. Okay, let's take it apart. My mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun. Mistress meaning the woman he is attracted to or dating. Okay, it's nothing bad. Okay, they're nothing like the sun. So he's automatically, right from the first line, he's parodying Italian, where it would be like, she has eyes that glow like the sun, which would be freaky, actually. But he says, my mistress's eyes, they're nothing like the sun. Mm-mm. He then compares her lips to coral and say, coral is redder. Normally it would be she has lips of coral. Coral can be anything from, in this context, hot pink to red. Okay. If snow be white, if you've ever read Snow White, you understand that the queen said, I wish my daughter had skin as white as snow, which would be really crazy. But fair skin was really important in the ancient world, not just in England, but that we saw that in Egyptian mythology, Egyptian history, in Greek history, in Roman history. It was because women tended to stay inside. So they didn't have a lot of melanin in their skin that would come up to the surface as a result of being exposed to the sun. So they didn't get tan. That's a fancy way of saying they didn't get tan. But he's looking at her and he says, well, her skin is not Snow White. She is actually more tan. He uses the word dun, meaning tan. Okay. And he's talking about, he's talking about her breast, where they tended to wear a little more of a low-cut shirt or a blouse the breast would only be exposed after the sun went down or in the evening. They would normally wear a tucker or a kerchief that went around their shoulders and tucked in. So it's called a tucker. And then in the evening, they would just take that off and suddenly they were in evening wear. Okay. If hairs be wires, well, thank goodness they're not, huh? Black wires grow on her head. So he's telling us she's not blonde, she's black hair. I've seen some people who have beautiful black hair. My granddaughter Lily has a deep chestnut brown hair and it's really pretty. And I'm not used to that because I'm used to, because I'm blonde. And I'm looking at her all the time. I'm like, wow, it's kind of cool. She's got really dark hair and really dark eyes. Okay, next I have seen roses damasked. Damask means kind of a combination of two colors. And in this case, it's striped because damask roses are striped red and white. But he says, I've seen roses damasked red and white, but no such roses see on her cheeks. He says she doesn't have like white skin with like rosy cheeks. No, she doesn't have that. And in some perfumes, there is more delight than the breath that from my mistress reeks. Okay. I have heard people try to backpedal for him on this and say, well, reeks back in this time just meant to be expelled, breathing out. Okay, that's great. But he's talking about perfume. So there's obviously an imagery issue going on here where he is saying there's more delight in perfume than the breath of my mistress whose breath reeks. In other words, doesn't smell so good. Perfume would smell better. Don't try to backpedal for William Shakespeare. He knew what he was doing. Okay, I love to hear her speak. That's good. He wants to talk to her and listen to her. Yet well I know that music hath a far more pleasing sound. We can talk to each other and enjoy each other's company, but yeah, you've got to admit, music has something that speech doesn't. I grant I never saw a goddess go. Generally, when people talk about goddesses, and in the Italian poems, when they talked about a goddess, it talked about their women, the woman they were attracted to as a goddess, that she just kind of floated and glided along. And he's like, yeah, my girl doesn't glide. Okay, she treads on the ground. She has heavy footsteps. And then he's going to wrap it up with, and yet by heaven. This is a vow. I swear by heaven. Okay, and yet by heaven, I think my love, that's the mistress, my love as rare. She is different. She is rare. She is something to be wanted, coveted, grasped, embraced. She is different. Okay? There's nobody else like her. I think my love as rare as any she belied with false compare. He says, I think she's more rare as she is than if I lied and compared her to the sun, to coral, to snow, to roses, to perfumes, to music. She doesn't need those comparisons because she's perfect for me just the way she is. Oh, it's so beautiful. I mean, at first it's almost like, dude, she gonna break up with you. But then when he finishes it, you're like, oh, you love her just the way she is. There's something amazing about that. Okay, let's take a look at the notes here. When William Shakespeare began to write sonnets, they were just becoming popular in England. Sonnets originated in Italy and were often written to woo women. Poets would use the sonnet form to describe the beauty of their women by comparing them to the ideals found in nature. They would usually begin with comparing a woman's hair to something like sunlight or silk, then move to her eyes and mouth and so on. Shakespeare took the sonnet out of the dating world and used it to relay more mundane things. Now, I gave you one that was in the dating world, but his other sonnets, they aren't all about dating, not even close. By the way, this rose inside the heart, that's a damask rose. See it? It's red and white. Cool. And then the beautiful picture, it's not even a picture, but the graphic on the other side where it says 130, you can see what it would have looked like if it had been printed during Shakespeare's day. Spelling's a little different. The grammar's a little different. Things change over time. Kind of cool, huh? Okay. Now, Shakespeare, I already explained most of this, but we're going to go through it. Shakespeare was hired to write sonnets by a noble woman who was trying to convince her son to settle down, marry, and have children. Shakespeare wrote a sonnet cycle featuring 4 different characters: the youth, that's the noble woman's son, the poet, the dark lady, and the rival poet. Shakespeare himself is not any of these characters. They are characters that he made up, okay? In the cycle, the youth, the poet, and the rival all fall for the same woman. And to give you a little bit of background, I put in a picture of Elizabeth Taylor, who was English. She moved to the United States when she was very young, but she was an English woman born in England. And you can see she has very, very, very dark hair. She has light skin, but she is not like Snow White. And she actually had violet eyes. It's kind of a genetic anomaly. It's really strange, but her eyes were so intensely blue, they were purple. Kind of cool. So I put a picture of her up, and this is her portraying Katharina in Taming of the Shrew, which is my all-time favorite Shakespeare play. Love Taming of the Shrew. But this gives you an idea of what the mistress might have looked like. You know, she's got the same basic characteristics here. And she was crazy. I love that. Katharina, not the mistress. So in Sonnet 130, Shakespeare's speaker describes the dark lady realistically rather than using overblown flowery language. It doesn't seem complimentary at first, but at the end, remember, we see that the speaker sees the mistress as perfect and without need of hyperbole. Hyperbole is extreme exaggeration. Okay, going back, let's read it one more time, and then we will go on to your last assignment. Sonnet 130, William Shakespeare. My mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun. Coral is far more red than her lips red. If snow be white, why then her breasts are dun. If hairs be wires, black wires grow on her head. I have seen roses damasked, red and white, but no such roses see I in her cheeks. And in some perfumes there is more delight than in the breath that from my mistress reeks. I love to hear her speak, yet well I know that music hath a far more pleasing sound. I grant I never saw a goddess go. My mistress, when she walks, treads on the ground. And yet by heaven I think my love as rare as any she belied with false compare. Ah, beautiful. Okay, do the homework for that. So it's 2 homework assignments you have. Get those done right away because the last homework assignment I'm giving you until next Friday. Okay? And it is write a list poem. List poems are really kind of interesting and fun. They are really nothing more than lists of things. So remember Noise Day when he's listing all the ways that kids can make noise by Shel Silverstein? If you don't remember it, flip back in your book to Noise Day. It was right after we started talking about imagery, and reread it and look at how he just used a list of things. So I'm going to give you some inspiration for how to write a list poem. You can start by thinking of an interesting place in your house that has an unusual assortment of things to write about. So consider one of these suggestions. What's on the top shelf of my closet? What's under my bed? Okay, we all have something under our beds that we're like, Now, I'm an adult, so when I moved into this house, my forever house, one of the things I did is I bought baskets for under the bed so I don't shove stuff under my bed. I can put it in a basket neatly and put it away. But we've all been there. We've all had stuff where you get ready to move houses and you pick up the bed and there's a box there from Christmas 3 years ago. Yeah. Okay. What's in the corner of the basement? If you have a basement, I don't even know if you do. What's in the pocket of my winter coat? Yeah, that happens to me every winter. I reach into my pocket and find something from the winter before. Sometimes it's a chapstick that they've discontinued the flavor. Yeah. What is in the old box in the garage? What's in the kitchen junk drawer? Almost all of us have those. What's in my locker? Hopefully nothing, since I told you to clean your lockers out before we went on quarantine. Half of you didn't do it. What's in my backpack? Ooh, there's something. Everybody's got their backpack at home. You can use one of these suggestions or come up with a subject of your own. You can do whatever you want. I did, when I was in college, there was a woman who did a list poem for a creative writing class using the class catalog from the college. It was really good. I really enjoyed it. It was fantastic. So you can even make that place an opening line. So tell me what you're doing, even if you don't mention it in the poem, make sure you use that for like your title, or, give me a clue what you're looking at. I could do a whole list poem in my library because I'm surrounded by books. So you could do book titles even if you want. The rest of the poem is just a list of items you find there. So I gave you an example. And when I read this example that I wrote, please don't worry about rhyme scheme so much. You don't have to worry about length. It shouldn't be too long. I don't want an epic. I don't want a book. Okay. But give me, a couple, like a page, not even a page, a paragraph poem. Okay. So we're talking like 8 to 10 lines at the very minimum. I'm not giving you a lot of rules for this because there's not a lot of rules for a list poem. When I do give you rules, I've got about 3 or 4 people who just ignore the rules anyway. When I don't give you any rules, people freak out and say, you didn't give us any rules. I'm telling you right now, there's not a lot of rules in a list poem. But if you make it rhyme, it will be a little easier for you. Okay? So use your creative mind. Again, I've got some people right now who are freaking out at home. I'm not creative. Breathe. Just do your best. That's all I'm asking for. Seriously. Just do it though. Okay, so let me read my poem that I wrote years ago. So here we go. It's called What's in the Car? Before we go on vacation, we really should clean out the car. It's full of empty water bottles, old candy that's sticky as tar. The shopping bags we always forget whenever we go to the store. We always say we'll take them in, but end up paying for more. Old Starbucks cards and coffee cups litter the back floorboard. We never remember to pick them up. It looks like we're starting to hoard. See, I did like almost every other line rhymed. That's a really, really easy rhyme scheme to do, so you could do that. But you use your creativity. Your assignment is to write a list poem. Plan what the poem should be about. That's your theme. Who is the speaker of the poem? For this person, I am the writer of this poem, but I'm not necessarily the speaker of the poem. The speaker is someone who's getting ready to go on vacation. Okay? What are the symbols and motifs? Do we have symbols and motifs in this one? Not really, but that's okay. Motifs, yeah, we have that. We've got junk in the car. Okay. What imagery and tone? I've definitely got some imagery here. I hope you could see the back seat of my car just before we went on vacation. This is when we had a kid at home still. And then the tone is, wow, our back seat is really dirty. We need to clean it out. Okay. It's not a bad tone. You guys just take your time, be creative. That's what I'm really looking for here. You have until next Friday to get this done. When you are done, you should say next Thursday because you're turning it in on Friday. Friday is the turn-in day. So you have until you turn it in to write this list poem. If you don't write the list poem, I'm just going to send the book back to you and make you write it, or else you don't get a grade. Okay? This is a test grade. It's a test grade, so you need to do it. You have to do it. You are required to do it. This is your last test grade for this class for the year. Now, I said that to make you do it, but there's no pressure actually when it comes to writing the poem. Take your time. Just make yourself a cute little poem, okay? Make it funny if you want. Make it gory if you want. I don't care. You know me. I'm pretty open-minded. But please, please, please get it done by next Friday. So that is it for us. We are done. You make sure your book is complete before you turn it in to the office. If you haven't turned in any homework since we've gone on quarantine, you need to go back and make sure that every single assignment in the book is complete. Because if you're missing grades, I'm just going to go through the book and I'm going to grade right there and put those grades in. So if you left blanks, that's going to be a 0. I'm not fooling around. I'm not going to go through a whole summer chasing you down to get grades, okay? You are mature enough now in 7th and 8th graders, and actually most of you are now 8th and 9th graders because we're done. So I expect you to show some maturity and make sure that every single assignment in your book is done, okay? And I hope that all of you have a great summer. I will see you in history class. We're not done with history, but congratulations, you have finished your Introduction to Poetry class.